In this FreeCAD beginners video, we'll be creating this object using the Part Design Workbench in FreeCAD version 0.21.2. I'll be using this reference image to grab my dimensions from for this object, so I'll include a link to this if you'd like to download it and follow along. To begin, we'll go into FreeCAD and create a new project. In the Part Design Workbench, we will create a body and then create a sketch. And this sketch that we're creating is basically just a two-dimensional slice of our object that we need to create prior to turning it into the 3D object shown here. So I'll create this sketch on the XZ plane, and then I will use the polyline tool to build out the kind of rough profile of this sketch. And auto constraints is enabled by default, but I'm going to turn mine off just for demonstration purposes. So with auto constraints turned off, you can see that we can kind of build out our profile here. You can right click to get out of that polyline tool. However, you'll notice that these lines, if you click and drag, you can move them in all sorts of directions. But of course, we will want them to be fairly vertical and vertical and horizontal. So using the vertical and horizontal constraints, we can kind of force those lines to line up just by clicking on them. You can right click to get out of that tool. I'll select the horizontal constraint tool, apply that here. And now if we click and drag, you can see the lines stay horizontal and vertical. Now, had you left auto constraints enabled, that would have happened automatically, but it's good to know how to use these tools without the auto constraints. Okay, so you can see that we have distances defined in this sketch here. So I will go ahead and create a horizontal distance constraint using this tool here. Click on our line and we can key in 30 millimeters because 30 is defined for the top value here. I will do the same at this bottom one for 50 millimeters. And I will move over to this vertical constraint and define that as 50 millimeters. Now you can see our sketch has gotten a little bit out of proportion, so you can drag this line over. I will also use the vertical distance constraint to constrain these portions of the sketch. I'm going to be setting those to 10 millimeters. We have that value from this portion of the diagram. I'll define that as 10 millimeters and 10 millimeters. And these labels, you can click and drag to position them so they don't take up so much of your view here. And if this text on yours is very small, you can adjust the size of it by going to Edit, Preferences, click on the Sketcher tab on the left, go to Display, and then modify the font size property. Okay, so at this point, our object is fairly constrained. Let's go ahead and create these curved portions. So we can use the Fillet tool to do that. With the Fillet tool, you select two edges that you want to create a fillet between. You can click this center point for the arc and drag it to adjust the dimensions, or you can select the arc itself and then create a constrained arc, or an arc or circle constraint rather. And based on our sketch, we see it has a radius of 10, but we're defining a diameter, so we will enter a diameter of 20. Okay, and we'll need a fillet on this face as well. So using that fillet tool, I will select this leg, and it created that fillet for us automatically. You can see we've lost our vertical and horizontal constraint down here, so we'll need to correct that. But first, we'll want to get this arc kind of in position to match up our sketch here. It doesn't actually define the radius for this arc for us, but we can see it's pretty much in line with the arc we had created initially. So if we take this center point and drag it to roughly the same spot as the center point on the other one, you can see it matches up pretty well. So what we can do is create a constraint using this coincident constraint. Basically, what this allows us to do is select 2 points and lock them together at the same position. So now if we drag that, both arcs are constrained. So we'll want to go ahead and recreate these vertical and horizontal constraints that we lost when we created those fillets. So if we reference this point here and this point here, we can see that needs to be a horizontal distance of 50. So I will use the horizontal distance constraint tool, select this point and this point, key in 50 millimeters, drag that down, and we will do the same for these points. So I'll use the vertical distance constraint, this point, and key in 50. Okay, so at this point, our sketch is pretty well constrained. You can see we can still drag it on the vertical and horizontal axes. So we'll use that coincident constraint we used earlier. And we can just pick any point on our sketch here. I'm just going to pick this one. And then we will constrain it with our sketch origin, which is this point in the center. So now that's locked in. Our sketch has turned totally green, so FreeCAD is happy. We are fully constrained. We can close out of our sketch, and FreeCAD has put us back in the part design workbench where we started. So here in the part design workbench, we can select our sketch, and then we can pad it. By padding it, we're going to be bringing it into the third dimension. So now we have a three-dimensional object. The default value of the length is 10 millimeters. But if we reference our sketch or our diagram, we can see that we need a 40 millimeter length. So we can change this value to 40 and click OK. Now our object is ready for its circle that we need to kind of cut through here. So you can see the circle is going to be on kind of this bottom face here. So if we select this face and then create a sketch, FreeCAD has kind of changed our viewing position a little bit. So I'm going to get us back into how we were looking before. If you click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 0 on your keyboard, you will toggle through the different preset views. So I'm at 0 right now. So if I create a circle and place it on this sketch plane, you can see that it's perfectly aligned with that face. We can see here that we have a diameter of 20 millimeters on this circle. So I will select our circle, select our constrain arc or circle tool, and key in 20 millimeters. So now our diameter is constrained. However, our position on this plane is not yet constrained. So on our sketch here, we can see that the center point of our circle matches up with this top edge, or this edge of our top piece here. So it would be really handy if we had a way to reference this line and create a constraint for our center point. Currently, we don't have that, but fortunately, there's a tool we can use called Create External Geometry. And this allows us to reference geometry from our three-dimensional object, and it will basically project that reference onto our two-dimensional sketch. So if I select this line here, you can see it has projected that line down into the two-dimensional view. So I just click 2 to return to this top view. You can also click on this little cube up here to kind of change your view. So 2 to return us to the top view. And now what I can do is use the constraint point onto object constraint, grab our center point of our circle, and then click anywhere on this line. And it has essentially locked our center point onto this line. So now we can't drag it off. So that takes care of kind of getting us aligned there. Of course, we need our circle to be kind of in the center on this vertical axis too. Since our object depth is 40, we know that if we create a distance of 20 between this point and our center point, we'll be perfectly aligned. So I'll go ahead and do that now. I will use the vertical distance constraint, select the top point, select our center point, and key in a value of 20. And now you can see our sketch has turned green, so we're fully constrained. FreeCAD is happy. You can see that matches up pretty well. So now we can close out of our sketch view here. So it's returned us back to the Part Design Workbench. With this sketch selected, we can use the Pocket tool, which is basically the opposite of the Pad tool. The Pad tool had created geometry in 3D space, and the Pocket tool will delete geometry in 3D space. So you can key in the dimension for the depth of this cut, or you can just say to first in this pocket type. You can click OK. And now we've got our hole cut in the center there. So now I'll go ahead and create these rounded corners. So just like in the sketch tool, when we had the create fillets, we have a create fillet tool in the part design workbench. So if you select these two edges here, and I was holding Control in order to select both of them, you can create, or you can select fillet, and you can specify the radius of the fillet to create. Through our sketch, we know that this is a 10 millimeter radius. So click OK, and that's done. So to add the radius to this bottom portion of our object, we can do the same method and use the fillet tool on these faces. However, you'll see a limitation of FreeCAD once we try to do that. So in our sketch, it's clear that we have a 20 millimeter radius along this edge here. So if we were to try to key in the value of 20 and hit OK, FreeCAD throws an error, it says failed to create fillet. So this is a limitation of the fillet tool within FreeCAD. Basically, a fillet cannot touch another edge completely. So you can see here as we increase and decrease this fillet, these edges come closer and closer together. We can do 19, and once we do 20, these edges would, in theory, be touching. And FreeCAD then throws the error. So we could get around this by making it 19.99 millimeters, which is close enough basically, but it's still not touching. Another method we could do to create this 20 millimeter radius here, rather than using the fillet tool, so I'll just go ahead and delete that from the model view here. Rather than using the fillet tool, we can create another pocket just like we did for this circle. So let me go ahead and demonstrate that now. I'll select this face, create a new sketch. I will press 2 to reorient our view here. And I'm going to use the external geometry tool to bring in some geometry for us to reference. So I'm going to bring in this circle here, and I'll bring in these edges too. Now I'm going to use the arc tool with the center and endpoints mode selected. And I will select our center point on the circle, and I will bring this arc tool out until it touches our reference line, and bring it through and click on this other reference line here. And so that's created an arc for us. And because we used the existing center point of our circle, which is already centered at 20 millimeters, this arc now has the correct diameter. We can verify that with the constraint arc or circle tool. So it's going to be a 40 millimeter diameter because we have a 20 millimeter radius here. So specify that. And since we're going to be doing a cut, we need to create some more geometry here that will kind of encompass these corners that we're looking to get rid of. So I'm just going to use the polyline tool and basically just bring out some lines just to kind of encapsulate this whole section here. I'll apply some vertical constraints, apply the horizontal constraints, and I'm going to give it just some arbitrary horizontal and vertical distance constraints. It doesn't really matter what it is at this point. We just need FreeCAD to be happy with the constraints here. So we have 1 degree of freedom that's still under constrained. So if I do a vertical constraint here, okay, now it's happy. So I'm going to close out of here. And now we've got our sketch. So using the pocket tool, I will pocket, and I'm going to say to first and click OK. And so that's another way of creating this radius without using the fillet tool. And you can see FreeCAD has no issue with this now. So yeah, it's just good to be aware that there's multiple ways to do things in FreeCAD. So you might occasionally run into an issue where FreeCAD throws an error. Chances are there's some other way to do what you're looking to accomplish. Okay, well that concludes this tutorial. I hope it was useful, and thanks for watching.